Well, we are in this series titled Chosen. And part one and part two, I shared with you that, there's going to be a 6-week series. And not only did I say it's going to be 6 weeks, I kind of gave you a glimpse into where we're going throughout this entire series. It'll look something like this. Now, I haven't given you too much information. Why? Because I think it's good to have some intrigue for you to kind of lean in a bit to try to guess where we're going. But I did say, hey, part 3, which is today, we're going to do something all week together, something I'm going to urge all of us to do together, but more on that in a bit. I shared with all of you that part 4 is something that you don't want to miss. I mean, if you're remotely close to one of our physical campuses, show up at one of our physical campuses next week, part 4. Again, it's going to be something that going to be life transformational. Then part 5, I color-coded it. It's July 4th weekend. Technically, it's July 2nd, but I color-coded it. I'm going to be doing something I've never done before, and you'll learn more about that next week. For part 4, I'll share all about it, so you'll know what's coming part 5. And then part 6 is, an epic celebration. So all of that means today we're part 3. And again, in a few moments, I'm going to share with you, I'm going to urge all of us to commit to a challenge to do together this coming week. Now, this entire series, we've been focused in on, these words that Peter wrote several thousand years ago. You can read them in 1 Peter chapter 2, and he goes, but you are, and there's one qualification for you to be a you are. That qualification is if you've placed your faith, your trust in Jesus. The Apostle Paul wrote it this way: if you declare with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the grave, you will be saved. A few thoughts later, he goes, everyone who calls on my name will be saved. So if you've placed your faith, your trust in Jesus, then you are. And then part 1, we focused in on that you are chosen. And again, just let that rest for a moment. That you are chosen, the God of the universe, creator God, all-powerful God, all-knowing God, perfect, holy God says, I choose you, that you are chosen. He goes on, he goes, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession. And then he writes these words, that you may declare, this is about sharing your story, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into, his wonderful light. So in part 2, we focus in on that last thought. And simply, you are rescued. You're rescued. The God, holy God, perfect God, loving God, grace-filled God, went into darkness to rescue you out of darkness. You see, we have to hold on to the reality that we have been rescued from something. The Bible is clear. We've been rescued from sin, and sin leads to death. That we've been rescued. We've been rescued from something. But so many times in the Christian journey, in the spiritual journey, it's so easy just to stop there. And that's where your faith journey stagnates. That's where your faith journey just kind of sputters out. It's just where you just kind of live the rest of your life saying, yeah, I get eternal life, and that's an amazing gift. It's an amazing gift. But Jesus says, I've come so that you can have life to the full, life abundantly. Jesus says, hey, that there's a life that you can experience here on this earth right now, beyond your imagination. You see, not only have we been rescued from something, we've been rescued for something. You see, it's so much better than just being rescued from something. And Jesus is like, hey, I have something for you. I have a purpose, a mission for this one life that you have to live. So today, we're going to be focusing on this phrase, a royal priesthood. And that's going to lead to our third you are statement. You see, so many times we think about this line, a royal priesthood, especially the word priest or priesthood. I don't know what you were raised in, but so many times, the priest in the church or the pastor in the church or the clergy in the church, right? Those people they just get elevated, whether they want to or not. They just get elevated, and all of a sudden people go, well, yeah, I'm not the pastor, I'm not the priest, or I'm not the clergy, and all of a sudden there's this separation that starts to happen. And I think it's so interesting that, well, Peter goes, no. You are, one qualification, if you place your faith, your trust in Jesus, that you are chosen, a royal priesthood. Again, the one qualification is so important. So if that's you, then Peter's saying to you that you're a royal priesthood. You see, Jesus, in Revelation, talks a lot about Jesus being the risen king. And so our royalty comes because Jesus is King Jesus, the risen King Jesus. The Bible also talks about Jesus being priest. He's the great high priest. In fact, you could go on a very, very interesting journey because, well, Jesus, his kingship comes from this line of Judah. Judah was one of the 12 tribes of Israel, and the great King David was from the line of Judah. But Jesus' priestly line didn't come from one of the tribes. In fact, the tribe of the 12 tribes of Israel, it was the tribe of Levi where the priest came from. But that wasn't Jesus' lineage. In fact, Jesus gets connected to someone that, well, we don't know a lot about. His name is Melchizedek. In fact, you can read about him in the book of Genesis. He shows up on the scene where we're just getting introduced to a guy named Abram. His name would be changed to Abraham, but we're just getting introduced to him. And all of a sudden, one day, Melchizedek, who's both king and a priest, shows up. Fast forward to Psalms 110, the most quoted psalm in all the New Testament, talks about this Melchizedek. And then you go to Hebrews chapter 7, and all of a sudden we start seeing this connection between Jesus and this priest, this king from the ancient days. You see, Jesus is the great high priest, and he is the risen king. So when we think about this phrase, a royal priesthood, there's a couple of insights I just want to share with you. You see, we're part of his kingdom so that we will radiate his light, the king's light. We are to radiate, or another way I could say we are to reflect him, right? Because he's king, and we want to reflect his kingdom, what he cares about, what he's passionate about. But we're also part of the royal priesthood. Again, Jesus is a great high priest, and we are to reflect his heart. So think about those two words, to radiate and to reflect. Being part of his royal priesthood means that we're going to surrender and serve. Surrender means we're going to give up our own kingdom. We're going to give up our own plans. We're going to surrender. We're going to obey the king, right? We're going to follow his desires, his wishes, where he's leading, and we're there to serve. An act of service, to say, what do you need? We're here to serve. And being part of his royal priesthood means that we have all the authority that comes from King Jesus, and we have access through Jesus to God the Father. And with that kind of in the background, with that kind of to help start to formulate what Peter was trying to get at as us, as a chosen people, a royal priesthood. I'm going to go back into the book of Romans. Now, in part 2, every verse we looked at was connected to the book of Romans, a couple in the Gospel of John, but mostly in the book of Romans. Romans was a letter that the Apostle Paul wrote later on in his life to the church located in the city of, you guessed it, Rome. And what's interesting is the church in Rome was going through a very, very difficult time. You see, they had come together as one church, both Jews and non-Jews, and then all of a sudden the emperor of Rome kicked the Jews out of the city. For 5 years, they were banished from living in Rome. Well, the emperor finally allowed the Jews to come back. And when they came back, the church that they had left started to look different. Why? Because 5 years is a long time. And, well, there wasn't one Jew now part of that. And so when they left, all the non-Jews started to come back into this church, and the church started just to look different because non-Jews didn't have the same customs and culture as the Jews. So the Jews came in and they made a comment that, well, we understand to this day. Well, that's not how church should look. That's not how church should operate. And so they started to morph it back to what they wanted to look like. And all of a sudden it created a pretty massive division. And the Apostle Paul sits down to write this letter to try to help both groups of people, the Jews and the non-Jews, to come back to the main thing. What the church, a gathering of people, was all about. What they should focus their time and their energy and their passions on, and what is really a waste of time. And so he started to write, this letter. In chapters 1 through 3, we're all about the problem. That we all are sinners. Everyone's a sinner. And we need something to save us from the darkness, to save us from, death, because sin leads to death. And then he starts to go, there's a remedy, right? We all need to be rescued, but there's a remedy. There's a way to be rescued. There's a plan to be rescued. There's a plan to get us out of our sinful state, because we all need it. And then he goes in and he's like, and when you place your faith, your trust in Jesus, right, there's a new life. Paul in another letter talking about that we're a new creation. The old's gone and the new is here. Not because we're good, not because we're perfect, not because we have all the answers, not because we'll never make a mistake again. Well, we're new. Why? Because, Peter says you are a chosen people. That word people means race, a new nation, a new family. That we're new. Why? Because Jesus was gathering people. Because he's King Jesus and great high priest Jesus into a new group of people. And Paul was just masterfully trying to bring the church back into this reality. It's not about being Jew or non-Jew. This is about the gospel, the good news, the church, a gathering of people on mission with God. It was all about understanding that they had been rescued from something and for something. Now, chapters 9 through 11, Paul focuses in on the Jewish people that were now part of this church. And remember, the emperor had kicked them out of Rome, and then they were coming back. It's like, hey, you gotta know that this gospel, the problem, the remedy, new life in Jesus, the gospel is for you too. And this is where Paul writes these great words. If you declare with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you can read that in chapter 10, right? It's like, hey, that's all you have to do. Hey, Israel, hey, Jewish people, that's it. Jesus did everything. And then something happens in chapter 12. All of a sudden, he kind of turns out of this. Chapters 1 through 11 is all about the gospel, the good news. This is a framework that should motivate, move the church, a gathering of people in everything they do, every decision they make. This is what they should be passionate about. And then Paul starts to turn the corner in chapter 12. And he goes, hey, chapter 12. This is what will unify you as a church. It's about God's love and his forgiveness. That, if you keep focused on that, it will bring the church together. And so then Paul writes these words. He goes, therefore. So the therefore is his turning the corner out of chapters 1 through 11. He's like, therefore, now that you are clear on the mission, the gospel, the good news that all of us are sinners. And God went to great lengths to rescue us from our darkness, from our sin that leads to death. Look what God, and when you place your faith and trust in Jesus, you're a new creation, you're a new life. You're part of this new kingdom, this new family, this new gathering. So Paul goes, so therefore, and he's like, hey, church, You got to lean in. I know you have differences of opinion and different thoughts, and a lot of that's attached to how you were raised and your culture and the religious framework in which you were raised in and all of that. But therefore, this is what you should rally around. This is what you should rally for. This is what you were saved from, rescued from, to be rescued for. Hey, come on. Pay attention to this. He goes, therefore, I urge you. Now that word urge is this ancient Greek word that literally is it's like 1 degree short of a command. Parents, you get this. I'm sure this has happened. I hope that I'm not the only one in my house that this has happened to. No matter the age of your kids, it's that moment you're in the kitchen and you look at one of your kids, no matter their age, and you're like, hey, will you go and do? And you fill in the blank. Hey, will you put away the clean dishes? Hey, will you put your laundry into the washer or the dryer? Hey, will you take out the trash? Hey, will you feed the dog, right? We ask these questions all the time. And if you've ever asked your kids to do something, sometimes they actually think you're asking. When 99.9% of the time, you're not. You're just trying to be nice. And if you've ever asked your kids to do something and they looked at you and said, no, you quickly go from asking to telling. And I feel like this is kind of what Paul's doing. It's like, I urge you. Hey, I'm asking. ... Like, you got to do this. This really isn't an option. I'm really not asking. I mean, I am asking, but I'm not. Come on. You got to lean in. This is mission critical. He goes, I urge you. And then you can tell he almost softens his language a little bit. He goes, brothers and sisters. Now remember, this is a powerful statement. Because under Jesus, this new movement, we now call the church a gathering of people. There are a chosen people, a new nation, a new race, a new family. I mean, this was so countercultural during a time where if you were a Roman citizen, you were above everyone. And all of a sudden, it wasn't about being part of the most powerful nation of the known world during that time. It was about being part of Jesus' kingdom, this new family, that no matter your gender, no matter your race, no matter your spiritual upbringing, no matter the part of the world you're from, now you are part of God's family. That you're united as God as Father, Jesus as King. He goes, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, I mean, think about this. In part 2, we looked at this diagram. And I said, hey, we're all on this life journey. We don't know when our life is going to end. And this world is a dark place. It's a sinful, broken place. And that's why the cross means everything. That when you place your faith, your trust in Jesus, right? That this is what Peter is writing, that you were called out of darkness, that you were drawn out of darkness. You were rescued out of darkness into his wonderful light. And when God raised Jesus from the grave, everything changed. Why? Because Jesus conquered death. He took the sin of the world. And now, when you place your faith and your trust in Jesus, your life starts to orb around Jesus, who's the light and life. So Paul goes, hey, in view of God's mercy, the length that God has gone to rescue you out of darkness, the length of God's love for you and his grace that covers your sin, in view of God's mercy, not because you'll ever be good enough, but because he is a good God. Not because he's expecting you to to live a perfect life. No, it's better than that. He goes, hey, I've called you out. I've called you out. He goes, in view of God's mercy. Offer your bodies. Offer yourself. Give up of yourself. And now this gets us into some priestly language, because the Jewish culture and custom, in fact, this even goes into the pagan worship and rituals. Priests would offer sacrifices of animals, sometimes people, on the pagan side. And so this language is priestly language. He goes, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. It's a powerful image to say, hey, now that you're part of God's family, now that you're a new creation, now that you realize that you're rescued from something, for something. Now you're one life that you have to live here on this earth. You should view it as, hey, I know where I'm going one day. It's eternity with God the Father. So this life, I'm just handing it over. It's not mine anymore. It's God's. My life is in His hands. I surrender my life in service for God. Holy and pleasing to God. Holy, set apart. Pleasing, like God is smiling. God's filled with joy because you're like, here's my life, God. I'm surrendering it to you. This is your true and proper worship. Now, so many times this word worship gets relegated to singing. You go to a church service and we worship, and that works for them. That's what we do. Singing is an act of worship. Or maybe you're driving your car and you turn on that worship album and you start singing, no matter how good you can sing or how bad you can sing. When you're by yourself in the car, you're singing. And so many times we just relegate the word worship to singing. But you see, there's a much clearer definition of worship. In fact, this ancient word can also be translated as service. That when you offer yourself in a surrendered state to say, God, my life is yours. This is about my act of worship, my act of service. That worship, at its essence, is serving God. That worship, at its core, is about saying, hey, God, I surrender to you, and my time, my energy, my gifting, my passion, my money, all of it is for yours, for you. I want to serve you with everything I am and everything I have. And Paul goes, do not conform to the pattern of this world. Now, our English language takes several words, conform to the pattern, but the Greek is only one word. It's only one word that encompasses this phrase, conform to the pattern. And this Greek word is so amazing because it's all about squeezing into its mold. That's what it means. Or to shape into its mold. And Paul's like, hey, don't be squeezed into this world's mold. And we all know that this world has a mold. It's a dark, broken, fractured world. We get it. We look around. We see it. We read about it. We watch it. We know it. We interact with it. Paul's like, hey, don't be conformed into this. And this world is trying to get you to be squeezed into its mold. It's what it's trying to do. If you watch the news, it's trying to squeeze you into the mold. If you scroll through social media, it's trying to squeeze you into its mold. If you've ever watched an ad ever for any product, they're trying to squeeze you into its mold. And Paul's like, hey, don't allow this world, this broken, dark, fractured, broken world, don't allow it to squeeze you into its mold. He goes, but be transformed. This word is literally the word we use for a caterpillar to go to a butterfly. It's a radical change of who you once were to who you're now becoming. He goes, hey, this is about changing into this new life. You're completely new. You look new on the outside and you're new on the inside. And how do we do this? He goes, by the renewing of your mind. The word renewing means to remodel or to renovate. If you've ever done any home remodeling or renovation, you know. I mean, you start to tear into something and you just never know what you're going to find underneath. I mean, so many times as I've done remodeling, renovating projects, I've always often thought to myself, it'd just be easier to start from scratch. In fact, when my wife will bring a piece of furniture home from a garage sale and she wants me to redo it, I will literally say to her, I'd rather just build you something new than trying to restore, to renovate, remodel this old piece of furniture. Why? Because you got to scrape it off and you got to tear it apart and you got to figure out how it's put together again. You got to remove all the old broken stuff and then try to get it back into looking not just like it was, but so much better. See, the renewing of our mind is a constant process. It's a constant journey of removing that old and infusing it with God's heart, what God cares about, God's desires, God's direction, who God is. And then Paul writes, then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is. At this point, see that process? Offering yourself as a living sacrifice. Offering yourself in an act of surrender and service. Renewing your mind. Removing the old. Infusing it with the new. And now go, God, what's your will? What's your heart? What's your plan? What's your path? What's your direction? God, I want to follow that. His good, pleasing, and perfect will. You see, we've all been rescued from something, for something. For God, in an act of service, to offer ourselves in surrender to Him, to say, God, I want my life to revolve, to orb around you. I mean, this is this picture. And as we revolve and orb around Jesus, to know what He loved and how He lived and how He led, we become more and more like Jesus. That's why Jesus says, if you follow me, follow, that's action. You'll have the light and life of Him. And you see this process that if you've placed your faith and trust in Jesus, you ask yourself, hey, God, what's your will? What's your good and perfect will? And now we want to be part of what God is doing. So when Peter writes, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood. I wrote the word. You're dispatched on mission with Him to follow His will in a life of service and surrender. The year was 1947. The guy's name was Bob Pierce. Bob had made his way over to China to teach in some schools, to help encourage some missionaries, and to share the good news, the gospel, the story of Jesus with anyone he could. He had found himself in a region where he was helping out one of the first formal girls' middle schools in China, where they were actually allowed to teach, middle school girls. He had been helping there for a short period of time and realized that he how to get back to the States. And so he had built a relationship with one of the local missionaries who was helping with this school, and went to her house. Her name was Tina, to just say goodbye. He knocked on the door. She opened the door, and in her arms was a young girl. Right away, Bob could tell that she had been beaten. Tina shared with Bob that she had accepted Jesus, named Jesus as her Lord and Savior. And when her dad found out, he beat her and then threw her out on the streets. So Bob looked at Tina and was like, well, I mean, are you going to keep her? Are you going to help her? Are you going to feed her? Or are you going to house her? And all the logical questions. And Tina fired right back at Bob. She looked at him and said, Bob, I'm caring for way too many right now. I can't keep caring for more and more. I just don't have the capacity. She paused and looking him right in the eyes. She goes, well, what are you going to do about it, Bob? What are you going to do about it? He reached in his pocket and pulled out a $5 bill, all the money that he had in his pocket, handed it to her, and said, every month, I'll send money to help this little girl. That's what I can do about it. Just a few short years later, he started an organization called World Vision, an organization to this day that is helping countless kids, families, people around the world. And you see, shortly after he handed that $5 bill over to Tina to help this small girl, he had opened his Bible and God had placed this simple prayer on his heart. He said, God, break my heart for what breaks yours. It's a simple prayer, but probably one of the most dangerous prayers you could ever pray. You see, I think it gets at the essence of what Paul was writing. He says, hey, offer yourselves as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing. Make your life into a living sacrifice, in an act of worship, an act of service to say, hey, God, I want to join you in what breaks your heart. Hey, God, I want to join you in what you're passionate about. God, I want to join you in what you are doing. God, break my heart for what breaks your heart. God, I want to live my life in an act of service and surrender to you. You see, this week, I want to urge you to sign up for what we are calling the Matthew 25 Challenge. Every day, there's a simple yet stretching action that we get to experience together. I say simple because it will be simple, and stretching, and it will stretch all of us. But I want to urge you to take that step, to sign up right now for it, and to say, I'm going to do this. And as you go through this experience with us, all of us together, all of our churches together, I want to encourage you to pray that simple prayer. God, break my heart for what breaks yours. Surrender in an act of service to God. To say, God, I want to live my life as a living sacrifice to you. Will you sign up? Will you take the step? Will you pray the prayer? God, break my heart for what breaks yours. I urge you, let's do it together.
This is real life. At times it can feel overwhelming, and you know what? That's okay, because there's love too. Jesus' unique invitation is to expand who we include when we think of family. It's easy to love your family. It's harder to love people you see around you. It's even harder to love people you've never met in a place you've never been.
Hi, My name is Ekai. I'm 12 years old and I live in Kenya.
Hi, my name is Ali. I'm 13 years old and I live in Lebanon.
Hi, my name is Cheru. I am 5 years old and I live in Kenya.
Imagine the hope we could bring, all of us together, for the least of these.